This is AI Goes to College, a new podcast about artificial intelligence in higher education and beyond.
Welcome back to AI Goes to College, where we explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and higher education. I'm your host, Professor Sarah Stewart, and today we're going to be talking about the future of jobs and work and preparing for an unknown future. Joining me today is a very special guest, Jeremy Caplan, Director of Teaching and Learning at City University of New York at the Newmark Graduate School of Journalism. He's a leader in digital education. He has a newsletter that he writes called Wonder Tools, which we're going to get into. Jeremy, it is so great to have you on the show. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
I want to give a little bit of background because you have so many things. So you're joining us from New York City today, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so that's where you teach at CUNY's journalism school, and you write the newsletter Wonder Tools, which is a really great resource to dig into. So lots of productivity and innovative technologies. As far as your background goes, you are a triple threat. You have a degree from Princeton, you have a master's and an MBA from Columbia. You have been a journalist for Time Magazine, and you're doing really big things, it sounds like, at the Center for Teaching and Learning at the school. So I really want to dig into that journalism creators program for entrepreneurs. But tell me a little bit more about your role. What did I not cover here, or what are you most excited about what you're doing?
Yeah, I love teaching, and I love helping other people teach. I love learning, and those are two sides of the same coin, of course. And I love learning about the new technology that surrounds us and how we can capitalize on it and use it for learning and for teaching and for enjoying the world that we're living in. So those are the things that excite me. And I love helping people create their own projects. So in the Entrepreneurial Journalism Creators Program, we help journalists around the world to create new micro ventures, newsletters, podcasts, niche websites, and so forth. And I love doing all that work because it's really exciting to help people who are building their own things, trying to bring new things into the world. So that's all stuff that really excites me. And I love trying to make my own stuff as well, like this newsletter that you referenced.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and I definitely want to get into that program and into Wonder Tools. But before we start talking about work, I like to ask all my guests what their favorite AI character in fiction, if you have one, from movies, television, a book. Do you have a favorite character that maybe inspires you or makes you scared about AI?
I have a few that come to mind when I think about that. One is Harry Seldon from the Foundation trilogy by Isaac Asimov. It's not exactly an AI character, but he kind of uses a kind of higher intelligence in a way to figure out what's going to happen in the future. Mm-hmm. The Robots series by Asimov also is a really prominent in my mind. I love this series when I was a kid called Not Quite Human, which was about a boy named Chip who was pretending to be a human boy, but was actually a robot. And
I don't need that.
It's maybe a lesser known one. And I liked Steven Spielberg's AI movie in 2001 with Haley Joel Osment. There's essentially, again, a similar idea where a boy was not human, but was kind of trying to be human. So I like stories that kind of explore that line between the human and the artificial. I think that's a really interesting exploration.
Yeah. It's interesting to see what science fiction writers from long ago and from more recently have done, and kind of where technologists have taken that, or used that as inspiration. So, yeah, very cool. Thank you for sharing that. And then also, it's kind of fun, but maybe you've already incorporated this. But like, what's a new tool that you're using with? Like, I'm playing around with Sora right now. I finally got in and got my account. Mm-hmm. How about you?
Sora is very exciting. I'm exploring ChatGPT Projects at the moment, having used Claude Projects for a while and Perplexity Spaces and NotebookLM. I am exploring new tools for measuring focus, actually. So I have a pair of headphones here, which allow me to measure essentially the way in which my brain is concentrating at any given moment. So it's a physical tool that uses AI to essentially measure. It's from a new company called Neurable. And essentially, it looks like a normal pair of headphones, but it actually operates like an EEG kind of monitor where it's measuring your brain activity by basically reaching points on your skull where it can measure that brain activity from. And it's connected to an app which helps you essentially monitor how focused you are during whatever particular work you're doing, and helps you identify patterns in your own level of focus, and helps encourage you to kind of give yourself brain breaks, for example.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so that's a really exciting tool to play with. Another one that I'm experimenting with at the moment is a Limitless Pendant. So this is from a company called Limitless. It's the Pendant product. It's basically a little audio recorder that is in the shape of a pendant that you can wear as a necklace, or you can pin it to your clothing. And with consent, of course, of the people you're with, or by yourself, you can use it as a digital recorder and apply AI to that to summarize what you're saying or what's being said in a meeting, and to then not have to continually look at a screen or have a phone in front of you to do that, but to be able to do it just even when you're out and not near a computer.
Wow.
So those are a couple of like devices that I'm experimenting with. I'm really interested in how hardware and AI will interact in the year ahead.
That's so interesting. Not that we promote any particular tools or brands here, but we'll definitely put that in the link, because I'm sure that listeners will be interested in.
And I would say I'm not affiliated with either of those companies or any particular company by any means. And I try a lot of different tools. Some of them are useful in certain ways and limited in other ways. And I'm definitely not advocating the purchase of any particular device or tool.
I'd love to use the focus one and kind of compare like me and my partner, like how different, different ways that we focus, or different time periods. I'm sure he focuses for longer time periods than I do, but it's interesting to see that.
Yeah. And even just even each of us, I think, focuses differently depending on different activities. So one of the things that's interesting about the app is you can indicate whether you're doing work or studying or doing creative work or entertainment, and you can see how your focus patterns are different for those different kinds of activities at different times of day, given different levels of sleep and other types of context. So yeah, even comparing within your own patterns over time, in addition to your partner as well.
I wonder if you're going to review these, I'm sure, in your newsletter, right?
Yes, I will write. I'll write about my experience with these devices.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just get into it. I thought you were perfect because you are an educator who helps guide students in developing these new ventures and these entrepreneurial projects. So what's your advice? If you could give advice to any new graduates, students who are maybe still in school, who are really concerned about the jobs that are going to be available to them in the next 5 to 10 years, what should they be preparing for?
Well, the first thing is literacy with new kinds of technology and new platforms, right? So if you are literate in how things work and what the platforms can do and what tools can do, you're going to be in a stronger position than if you are not literate and don't understand or haven't tried or aren't aware of what is out there. So that's kind of the base level for people, preparing to be on the job market and to find opportunities. I think another consideration is to understand what people are looking for in the marketplace when they're hiring people, which is they want people they can rely on, who are going to be not just reliable, but consistently working at a high level and independently taking the initiative to be responsible for their own work, which is nothing to do with technology necessarily. It's more about a work habit, an attitude, a mindset. And those are the kinds of things that students can prepare for outside of the realm of technology.
Right.
And then there are the skills related to the field itself, right? So if you are interested in doing multimedia video editing or audio editing or writing or any kind of work in the realm of the professional sphere you're heading into, like being really, really focused on excelling at that particular area and identifying where your limitations are and how you can improve on those specific limitations and where your strengths are as well. Being
Yeah.
aware of your strengths and then accentuating those strengths and understanding how to use them. So I think those three things are really important areas of focus: understanding where new technology is and being up to date and literate about that, being aware of the technical skills that you have and the limitations you have technically and related to your subject matter, and then having kind of mindset and reliability, consistency, punctuality, those kinds of like baseline characteristics that employers will expect and will need and will evaluate people based upon.
Mhm.
Those are really, really important three facets for people to be prepared to excel in the job market.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I like, yeah, being aware of your limitations is a, you want to make a long list of what you can do, but it's nice to know, what are my limitations or where do I need more career development, professional development. Yeah. So kind of building on that, specifically, I wonder how much experience or how much interaction with, this can be with friends, maybe with colleagues, but like, what experience do you have with employers recently? Like, have you talked to any business leaders, hiring managers about the kinds of skills they want to see in new hires? And maybe this is from like, your recent graduates. They're coming back and they're telling you this is what I need to know. So what are you hearing from the workforce?
People want people who can take the initiative and do things without being asked to do them. The organizations in the journalism realm and in other realms as well are increasingly limited in their bandwidth, right? They have fewer employees working on, various projects. They have tighter budgets. They have tighter timelines that they're operating on. So they need people to kind of take the initiative. In the old days, in a lot of careers and a lot of fields, and certainly within journalism, there would be a larger staff in any given section. For example, if you take a news magazine or newspaper as an example,
Right.
or a TV station, you'd have a large staff of people. And so there would be a period of time, first few months, first year, where people would gradually be kind of being taken under someone's wing, right? Getting used to the job, getting training, getting experience practicing. And increasingly people are brought in with the expectation they're kind of going to hit the ground running, right? They're going to be ready
Right.
to go. And particularly people coming out of a grad school program, the expectation is they're really ready to go. And so employers are expecting that, and they are often not providing the detailed, lengthy professional development kind of training that they might have a generation ago or in the past. And so that's an important thing for people coming into a new job to be aware of, that they kind of are going to have to figure things out, and they're going to have to take the initiative, and they're going to have to go and get the answers they need themselves in many cases.
Yeah.
And it's important that students are aware of that. If they're expecting a different kind of environment, they might be surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. It also strikes me that I think some hiring managers, some employers are actually thinking, hey, you're 23 years old. You should know this new technology, or I'm expecting to learn from you, which is kind of a new turn of events. That wasn't the case 20 years ago. It's like, what are we going to learn from you?
That's a great point. Yeah, there is this assumption that's age related, that people who are in their 20s, as you said, are up to speed on AI, for example, that they are up to date on social platforms, that they're heavy into TikTok and Instagram,
Mhm.
and that they are ready to shoot video and record audio and do multimedia storytelling and social media storytelling, and it's not necessarily the case.
No.
Right?
I want to talk about some specific tools that you use that have significantly changed your productivity, maybe your creativity as well. What are these tools? And not necessarily to get into, again, promoting specific brands, but really, how is this making a difference for for those of us who are trying to change some of the skills, trying to upskill for our futures? What are you using?
So one of the types of tools that I use that I find particularly helpful is uh, Bionic Dictation apps, essentially apps that allow you to record yourself and
Mhm.
to think out loud, and then to transform that kind of language into summaries, into outlines, into material you can then use, whether for teaching purposes or for your professional purposes of whatever kind of employment you're involved in. And so what I've done in the past is sit in front of a blank screen, right? We're all used to the cold start problem, and trying to pull ideas out of my mind and type them onto a blank page, onto a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word document, right?
So hard.
Now what I can do is I can walk around, I can go for a walk, and there's a lot of research that says that we often think more openly when we're walking, right? We're moving, and when we're in nature. And so I can go for a walk here in Central Park near my office in Manhattan, and I can have a Bionic Dictation app. There's a whole lot of them. Audio Pen is one, Oasis is another one, Letterly is another one. There's a lot of different apps that do something very similar, which is allow you to record, much like a voice recorder would in previous generation of apps. But now it transcribes that text, and in addition to transcribing it, it transforms it. So it gives you an outline, it gives you a summary, it gives you a list, it gives you a draft of a lesson plan, it gives you a draft of a presentation, it gives you whatever kind of format you want for the work that you're doing.
Wow.
Without having to sit in front of a screen all day and fight against that cold start. You're just thinking out loud, and essentially applying AI to your own thoughts. So this is an important distinction between using a kind of general AI tool and using this kind of tool, because it's starting with your own thoughts, and it's essentially transforming your words into a different format, but the ideas are still coming from you. So it's not ideas that are coming from the AI model, it's ideas that are coming from you, and the AI is just really helping you. It's assisting you in organizing those ideas, putting them into a list form, into an outline form, into a summary form, into a draft form, into a script form, whatever it is that you're trying to do. And to me, that's been a really helpful tool for whatever kind of work that I'm doing. And it allows me in a kind of surprising way to get away from a screen, right? Because yes, I may be running the app on my phone, but my phone might be in my pocket and using my AirPods, and I'm just talking, right? I'm just thinking out loud and enjoying nature, enjoying a walk. And in the process, also outlining my various projects, outlining my work. So that's one area that's been really, really helpful for me.
Can you repeat that? You called it a certain thing, and I know you said Audio Pen was one of the products, but what type of tool is this?
Yeah, I call it Bionic Dictation. You can call it AI dictation if you want to use that term. It's essentially the use of AI to a dictated audio note.
Okay, yeah.
And yeah, the tools include Audio Pen. Oasis is another one I use. I use another one called Letterly. There's a variety of different apps which you can use, which all do essentially something similar, which is apply AI to a recorded voice note.
I love that. And I'll let you get, I know you have another one too, but I love that because I feel like I use a combination of Google Docs and ChatGPT and, just other apps to do this kind of thing. But it sounds like this is a much more useful, just kind of opening one app and not, transferring my voice message on my iPhone to this and to that. So yeah, thank you for that. Awesome.
Yeah, and once you have the material, you can then put that material in whatever other tool you want, right? So you can then use that outline or that summary or that draft in whatever application you want to use, right? So this is sort of, in a way, platform and tool agnostic, right? Which I think is also helpful.
Yeah.
Another tool or category of tools that I find really useful these days are projects, AI projects. And what this means is that rather than starting from scratch each time you're using AI with a brand new prompt, starting with just a blank surface and giving the AI a prompt, you start with context that's already baked into the AI project that you're working on. Okay. So you can think of this as having a notebook essentially and applying AI to that notebook or the folder of material. Okay. And what that allows you to do is, for example, if you're teaching a class as an instructor, right? You can have related documents about the class, your past lesson plans, your past syllabi, whatever materials are related to that class. And you can then basically apply the AI to that existing material, that's your own material, and use that AI project to prepare new lesson plans or to prepare new activities or to prepare new explanatory documents you're going to provide to students or whatever it is that you're creating as an instructor or in whatever field you're in, right? You can use the project tool in whatever kind of project you're working on. It could be for planning a trip. It could be for planning any kind of project. And once you've provided that core set of documents
Mm-hmm.
in that project, you've also given some instructions that say, this is the context for this project. Now, each time you're prompting that AI in that project, you don't have to go through and start from scratch every time.
Right.
And so what it allows me to do is to have a bunch of standing projects. And when I'm working on that particular project, I can go in and use the AI in a contextually relevant way without having to give it tons and tons of context every time,
Mm-hmm.
and without getting a response that doesn't have that relevant context.
Yeah.
So to me, it's been a hugely efficient way of organizing a whole range of different projects,
Mm-hmm.
and also augmenting the way that I think about certain things.
Yeah, for sure. So can you give me, like, where does this live? Can you give me an example of a specific tool? Because I feel like I use ChatGPT in this way where I have, each new entry does have that background information, but I do worry, where does this live and how do I access it again? What is an AI project?
So there are several different ways to kind of create projects and run projects within different AI tools. Claude Projects was the first one to kind of do this in a particular way and call it projects.
Okay.
There's now ChatGPT Projects as well. Perplexity has something called Perplexity Spaces.
Okay.
And NotebookLM is a tool from Google that also has this concept of projects, although they frame it as a kind of a notebook.
Yeah.
So you can create a notebook with up to 50 different sources.
Yeah.
And each source can have 500,000 words. And in the case of NotebookLM, you can bring in YouTube videos, you can bring in audio files, you can bring in links to things you've written online, you can bring in documents of various kinds and PDFs. So you can bring in all sorts of different documents. And then with NotebookLM, it'll give you a summary of what's in all those documents. It'll help you find connections between those different documents. It'll answer questions, it'll put them on a timeline, it'll do all sorts of different things that really help you make use of that volume of information that you might have that at least my human mind can't necessarily wrap its head around, 50 different sources, each of which have all of these different sections and complexity to them. So it allows you to do really kind of advanced thinking about connections between different materials. I'll give you an example of one project that I'm working with now.
Yeah.
And it is based on the books that I've read and the material that I've highlighted over the past decade. So I've essentially captured the highlights of all the Kindle books that I've highlighted using a tool called Readwise, and also the podcast snippets that I've highlighted using a tool called Snipped, which is a podcast player that allows you to highlight interesting or important sections of a podcast, as well as online articles that I've highlighted over the years. So all of those are stored in Readwise, and then Readwise can export all of those highlights.
Okay.
However long period of time you have and whatever platforms you use to make those highlights. And now you've got this collection of highlights in a Google Doc, in this case, let's say, and that it includes the title of the publication or the title of the podcast or whatever material you're highlighting, and the highlight itself, as well as whatever annotation, right? And now you bring those into an AI tool, a project.
Okay.
And you also include, let's say, your notebook of books that you've read, your BOB or book of books, right? A lot of people keep a journal of the books they've read. So I can now put my journal of the books I've read separately from my highlights, right? I have a spreadsheet of the 80 plus books we've read in a book group that I facilitate. And it has annotations of those 80 books. Now, all of those documents, including all those highlights, those list of books, live in a project.
Okay.
And now I've been querying the AI about what are some connections, interesting patterns, what are some areas of reading that I haven't done, what are some related books that might be of interest for me to dive into based on this reading and based on these highlights. And then when I'm thinking about particular topics, what are some, thinking about time management and going into the new year, what are some of the sources that I've highlighted in the past that really focused on that? And what are some ways in which those sources agree with one another? And what are some interesting places and ways in which those sources disagree? Give me the example of the citation so I can go back and look at those. So it becomes basically an augmentation of my own notes, of my own materials, and gives me whole new ways of drawing connections between the materials I've read, and also suggests materials that I haven't yet read that I might want to read or I should read. And you can take it in all kinds of interesting directions, right? I can say, well, I'm interested in some Japanese, reading more Japanese books I haven't read in the past couple of years. And what are some Japanese books that connect to some of the books that I've highlighted?
Mm-hmm.
Or what are some historical classics that aren't on my list that relate to some of the books that I've read that I might want to examine? And, you can take it in a lot of different directions. What are movies
Yeah.
that relate to some of the books? Or what are some other, works of art that I
Wow.
might want to study, or artists that I might want to study based on some of the materials that I've highlighted? And what are the connections between those recommendations and the books that I've most recently read? And there's just a whole world of inquiry that we can use once we have that starting point of
Mm-hmm.
our own material.
For sure. Yeah, I can
To
imagine.
off from.
Wow. Yeah, you can become super professor with that. Like that's amazing. Just all I don't know, I can just imagine all of the connections that you're making and how you don't have to have your smart friends recommend books and movies to you anymore because you're just, interacting with your project.
Well, it's definitely not mutually exclusive, right? It's definitely a particular kind of intelligence, right? That's giving you a particular kind of information. And that's definitely different than the human information, which is totally valuable and useful as well.
Mhm.
But I just want to underscore how the idea of the project is fundamentally different than just starting with ChatGPT,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
just giving it a prompt and asking it for something. Now it has all of this material that I've supplied it with, right? That gives it some grounding and foundation. And now I can come back a day later, a week later, and I can continue that conversation, right? That's where I think the project becomes really valuable, as
Mhm.
opposed to, again, just going back to the raw, blank prompt, empty prompt space where you're kind of starting from scratch and it doesn't have so much context. I do want to say that there is a concept of memory, right? That ChatGPT and other platforms now have to some extent. If you've enabled that memory function, it will remember certain things that you've told it and certain queries that you've given it and so forth, but it's sporadic and it's only a
Yeah.
small subset of all that material. So you're
Mhm.
still largely operating from scratch each time, unless you're operating in the context of a project, which is why I think the idea of projects is really foundational to this next era of AI.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad we're having this conversation because, yeah, I find myself when I'm interacting with ChatGPT, at least, like sometimes it remembers and sometimes it doesn't. Um, but yeah, that really helps. And just to dig into the weeds a little bit, because I know I have at least 10 years of history of reading my Kindle. You said Readwise, that will be able to go through your Kindle books and find all of your notes and your highlights.
Yeah, so Readwise plugs into a whole range of services, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
essentially a platform that kind of allows you to import highlights from a variety of different tools that you might use, including Kindle.
Yeah.
You can also export Kindle without using Readwise. You can kind of export your Kindle highlights and import them into a document of some other kind, or create a PDF. So there are other ways to kind of use highlights from whatever platform you happen to prefer,
Yeah.
as long as you can export them from that platform into some neutral kind of document like a PDF or a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word doc. As long as you can get it into that format, then you can import it into the AI tool. Eventually, there'll be more direct connections. So
Mm-hmm.
you'll highlight something, it'll automatically, for example, be in a project that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, you have to kind of do that manual piece of
Yeah.
exporting it from one platform and bringing it into the other.
Okay. Yeah, I'm also glad we're having this conversation because just a few days ago, I finally got to LM Notebook and was just trying to. I think I'm just like overwhelmed with so many new apps and
Yeah,
new tools.
you're not alone.
And I was
A
like,
lot of us feel
what
that.
is this exactly? So that gives me some great context for kind of what function that serves. And I mean, I had fun with it. I made a little podcast, but I'm glad you explained that. So that's great. So since we're talking about tools, tell us about your newsletter. Like I love the name Wonder Tools. What are you featuring in there and what's the format? How can we join and get a subscription?
Yeah, it's free. It's wondertools.substack.com. It's a free weekly newsletter for people who are curious and want to explore new technology, but don't have time to test everything themselves. And like you, are sometimes overwhelmed just because there's dozens of new tools that are emerging every week. So I try to clarify something new each week. And sometimes they're AI related. Many times they're not always. So I sometimes will
Mhm.
talk about the new things you can do with Google Docs, for example, or Google Slides or Google Sheets, which are tools that a lot of people use, but they may be curious to learn a little bit more. And it's something you can read in a few minutes. And the idea is to clarify something and explore something from an independent journalistic perspective, basically to help people discover how they can be more creatively productive. So it's not just about doing more or kind of like trying things for trying's sake, but because we all have things we want to do besides taking care of the tasks and the email and the items and meetings on our calendar. We also want to be creative, but we also want to have time for other things. And we can use technology in many cases to help us do that. So to help us do things more efficiently, more creatively, make work a little bit more fun.
Yep.
So I've explored things like new ways to edit video. For those who aren't video professionals, there are new tools that allow you to, for example, just upload a video and use natural language to just tell it what kind of edit you want, right? I wanted an 8-minute version of an hour-long workshop that I taught recently, and I was able to just use natural language to kind of guide it to give me that short edit that I could share.
Wow.
Another tool, for example, I wrote about recently, that tool is called Eddy AI, by the way. Another tool I wrote about recently has allowed me to begin coding a little bit, making little games and little applications called Windsurf Cascade. And that, again, was completely new to me. I was not a developer, not a coder, always assumed that I would have to have a lot of technical expertise to do that. And all of a sudden, there was a new tool that let me use natural language to kind of describe what I was trying to create. And it would basically help do it for me.
Wow.
And I wrote about that, written about other tools that allow you to use AI in creative ways, Claude Projects, Perplexity, which is Perplexity is a great advancement on the search idea, right? Right now, most people search with Google. And when you search with Google, you just get 50 different links thrown at you or hundreds of links. And you kind of have to struggle through them and figure out what's what. And with Perplexity, as an example, and there are other search engines like this, you get a concise summary, a briefing.
Yeah.
And you get follow-up queries that you can follow up to dig deeper in, and you get citations.
Right.
So a lot of people are worried about, understandably, about confabulation or AI essentially making something up. And with Perplexity, you get the actual citations. So you can get a briefing on a topic, learn about something you don't know about or you want to know more about, and then get the citations to go back to the original sources. And then you get follow-up questions.
Yeah.
You can learn more. And that, again, is something I've written about and something that I've learned about, and that's been tremendously useful in my day-to-day workflow.
Really?
Because every day we're confronting something we don't know. At least I am.
Yeah.
Confronting a new term that I hear or something I come across in the news or a topic that's brought up in relation to something I'm teaching about. And I can go to the library if I have the time and bandwidth to go to the library and find a book and read about it. But in many cases, it's something passing and something quick. And if I go to Google, I'm just going to end up with a laundry list of links. And if I go to Perplexity, I'll actually get a briefing, which allows me to quickly understand a topic. Those are some examples of tools that I've written about in Wonder Tools. And my goal is to just be helpful for people who don't have the time to do all this exploration themselves, because I love trying new tools and exploring new tools and assessing them and learning about them. And I know a lot of people don't have time to do that. So this is my way to kind of help people while also indulging a personal passion, a personal hobby of my own. And so it's been an exciting way to share what I'm already kind of learning and exploring.
Yeah, well, it's a great service. Thank you so much for doing it because, because when I go on there and I take the time to read it or take the time to read other people's newsletters, who do the same thing, it really saves so much time because it's like a lot of times we're trying to learn new technologies to save time. And all we're doing is just learning one thing after the other and not really digging deep into any one of them. So I find that Wonder Tools and what you do and what you speak about makes it so much easier to cut through all of that. And like you're doing all of the experimenting for us. So wonderful job.
Thank you.
I want to, speaking of tools, I want to kind of move back into education and training. So let's start with education. Even though we're talking about the future of work, I kind of wonder, what approaches do you think the institutions need to adopt? What kinds of maybe tools do they need to adopt so that faculty can effectively teach students who are going to be in these industries that are reshaped by AI? Is there anything that we should be doing right now as institutions?
One thing is basic literacy. So I encounter a lot of faculty members who are afraid of AI, have never used an AI tool except maybe, written a poem, in the style of Michael Jackson, ended with Shakespeare or something. But there are many folks out there who have never really spent any time on thinking about how AI can be applicable or experimenting or exploring. And I think, and they're operating from a place of fear in some cases, or just a place of being overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Because many of us in academia are just overwhelmed with the various responsibilities we have. So I think that's the first step is we've just as we had to get up to speed with computers when computers first emerged, and then we had to get up to speed with the internet when the internet emerged, and with social media when social media emerged, and mobile devices each time a technological development comes around, there's a moment where we kind of have to make sense of it, right? We have to figure out what is this thing, and what is it useful for, and what is it potentially problematic for, and the first step is really understanding it and exploring it and experimenting a little bit. So that's one thing. And institutions, I think, have to help support faculty and staff who are trying to do that, right? They don't necessarily have the bandwidth or the know-how to suddenly magically understand all of it themselves. And so I do think there's a value in having some shared professional development, some shared sandbox spaces where we collectively kind of experiment and talk and share. And sometimes this is internal, right? It doesn't always have to be an outsider coming in. It can be internal champions, internal explorers who kind of share with one another. So that's the first thing. I think a second thing is, there's costs entailed with using AI at a high level. And for example, subscription to service like ChatGPT or Claude or even Perplexity Pro, these services are typically about $20 a month, right? It's a couple $100 a year. It's not nothing. And if you're subscribing to a couple of these different services, and if you're doing it on your own, that's an investment or a personal hit to people's budgets, which they may or may not be able to do. So I think especially adjuncts and other people who are not necessarily being compensated for all of the supplemental extra work that they're doing. And so I think institutions in some cases may need to allocate budgets for AI tech, just as they allocate budgets for Zoom and Google Meet during the pandemic, and just as they allocate budgets for research tools and so forth. So that's one thing the institutions can do, is kind of figure out what are some ways in which we can provide tooling so that people can do this experimentation, exploration. I think it's important that is also done in a future-proofing kind of way. So you don't want to be too wedded to any one particular company, ideally, so that we can flexibly inhabit the broader world that we're living in, which is not dominated just by any one particular company. And that's also a delicate process because the platforms are changing and shifting, and schools sometimes have relationships with one provider or another provider or vendor, et cetera. But I think being open and not committing too narrowly to any one particular company is a good strategy. Protecting people's privacy and security is really important too. Making sure that when we adopt new tech, that the privacy and the copyright respect and various other factors are in place. That's another thing. So these are all things that institutions can do, and just most importantly, setting a culture of willingness to explore and openness to new things. Not necessarily embracing, the latest flavor every month just for the sake of it, but recognizing when massive changes are arriving in our ecosystem, and not ignoring those or not burying our heads in the sand. And the institution can kind of help lead the way on that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think, on the one hand, you can kind of adopt too early and adopt too much. And on the other hand, just being overwhelmed and scared, that's okay for a few weeks, a few months. But at some point you have to face the music. So I know here we were kind of scrambling at first, but at Florida State College at Jacksonville, we now have a pedagogy certificate for teachers, for educators and for professors here, just a few different courses that of professional development that we have provided. And then we are also working on a badge for students or a certificate for students so that they can kind of concentrate, kind of not a minor, but have a concentration in AI.
Hmm.
But I wonder if there's any standout programs or initiatives that you've seen successfully, maybe not even at institutions, but even at companies that are, kind of reaching out and trying to support either students or employees in learning these new skills.
From what I've seen thus far, individual students are largely on their own in many cases, right? There aren't a lot of kind of broad institutional programs focused specifically on training students to adopt AI in a professional way and to use it in their classes in a effective and also an ethical way. I think there's a lot of scrambling that's going on at a lot of institutions because they recognize how important it is. They also recognize that students are using AI regardless of whether there's an official policy or not. And they recognize a need, just as they began to recognize the need in those prior, technological eras that we spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I still think we're very early on. I think that there's still a kind of a reaction mode, and the tools are changing so rapidly, right? They're advancing so quickly in terms of what they can do. They're increasingly being built into the hardware itself, right? So I showed earlier the headphones and the pendant, but even the laptops we use, the phones we use are increasingly incorporating AI. The software we use that isn't AI software, but Microsoft Word, Google Docs, Zoom, all of these other tools we use, those tools are also incorporating AI.
Mm-hmm.
So it's essentially going to be baked in deep into the infrastructure, our learning management systems, right? Our content management systems, our learning management systems at schools. All of these systems are basically baking in AI,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think we've quite quickly enough gotten ahead of that, and
Right.
so we're in kind of reaction mode.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the next couple of years are going to require that we move really nimbly
Mm-hmm.
to both understand what these different tools do and to carefully think through acceptable uses, unacceptable uses, and gray areas in between, which are going to require a lot of subtle and complicated thinking in terms of what we accept, what we encourage, what we discourage, what we disallow, what we allow. There's going to be a lot of nuanced decisions we have to make. For example, in certain disciplines, it might be acceptable to use AI as part of our research process
Mm-hmm.
in certain ways, right? For example, using tools like Consensus or Elicit, which are AI search engines, to identify potential research sources that we can then read and study and examine as
Mm-hmm.
part of our process. In other disciplines, there might be decisions made where AI is not acceptable. For
Right.
example, in generating media for us, if the goal of our subject is to learn the process of generation, we may not want to have the AI doing generating for us. And anyway, those decisions are going to have to be made in some cases discipline by discipline,
Right.
and it's going to require a lot of nuanced consideration, which will hopefully be grounded in a basic literacy of what the tools are doing and how they work and what their potential uses are.
Sounds like a lot of flexibility on our part and agile, skills, on the organization's part. I recently read an article, I think it was about the unfathomability of some of these programs, and the unfathomable nature of algorithms that sometimes are making decisions about our health, even like, sentencing, for, criminal cases. And yet it may be beyond us to even fathom how things are working. So I think you're right, grounding it in an understanding if we're going to be using these tools.
Yeah. And to that point, I think there are going to be bright lines where we decide, for example, we do not want to use AI in our admissions consideration process.
Right.
Certain institutions are going to make that decision, and that's they're going to want to be able to justify their decision based on data, based on examples, based on case studies, based on a pro and con kind of analysis. And in order to do that, they'll need to have literacy and understand kind of how it can go wrong and why people are using it in some cases and why they decide not to in others.
Yeah, for sure. All right, just getting back to with this final question, I just want to get back to the future of work. So hopefully, maybe this is on a positive note. But I wanted to know if there's any like emerging careers or industries that you're particularly excited about. Where AI skills will be critical. Like, how can students best position themselves for these opportunities?
I think there are three areas that are big growth areas in the years to come that students can definitely position themselves toward. One is in terms of data analysis, and augmented data analysis with AI is going to be a new area where you essentially can take giant data sets, but also disparate data sets, so multiple different kinds of data sets, and apply AI to them, but also apply human understanding to what the AI is doing and to what the data is saying and to what conclusions can be drawn and what visualizations might be most helpful and how to communicate the results of that analysis. Data analysis is something people do across fields, already do across fields, but we'll do even more of as more and more data is produced by everything from our toasters to our TVs to our websites we're using and so forth, and all the systems we use in our work. So that's one, data analysis, and specifically augmented data analysis using AI. Another is community engagement. So in a lot of fields, first of all, we have a loneliness epidemic, right, across the country, across the world. In a lot of fields, we need to build community within our organizations, but also with our audiences or with our communities that we're serving, right, in whatever field we're in. And it becomes increasingly challenging these days when people's attention is pulled in so many different directions, their time is limited, they're being communicated, to over and over throughout the day by all sorts of organizations, and people are feeling less and less connected to institutions, and they're more and more drawn into their screens, right?
Right.
So given all that context, community engagement is already and will be even more essential in the years ahead for organizations that want to have these connections. And that's a skill set that people can work on and gain experience in and develop expertise at. And there's increasingly a discipline of engagement journalism within the journalism sphere. There's increasingly within the education sphere notions of how we engage our students and engage the faculty and staff communities in new ways. And then within HR kinds of fields and other disciplines and other areas, there's also this notion of kind of community engagement. So that's another area. The third I would point to that I think is a big growth area is the world of creators. So people who are creating original high quality content, whether in video format and audio format and text format and newsletter format and podcast format. There's a way in which we kind of consume media now that is increasingly driven by, delivered by, created by independent individual creators in many cases.
Right.
And even within institutions, there are people who are responsible for creating that kind of institutional content. And increasingly that is the coin of the realm. Like that's how we stay connected to people in our community. That's how we reach new people. That's how we communicate the vision that we have or the work that we're doing. And so people who can do that really, really well, harness different kinds of modes of storytelling, of creating newsletters and podcasts and video channels, and understand that kind of storytelling, understand that kind of communication, understand that kind of writing, and design that well, shape that well, execute that well. I think that's a huge growth area. And there'll be jobs across spheres, right? In museums, in financial institutions, in education institutions, in journalism institutions.
Yeah.
So that is a kind of also like community engagement, like augmented data analysis. Those are all areas that are growth areas that students today, right now, can expand their efforts in. And that there'll be in my view, be a continued demand for, even when AI can take care of certain aspects of certain jobs. Like those are three areas that will require a growing number of people, humans.
Awesome. So we have augmented data analysis, we have community engagement, and we have creativity or creators across different industries. And it sounds really like what's needed is not only how to use AI, right? They say that AI is not going to take our jobs, people who know how to use AI, but also in some ways, like how these applications are working, right? How does AI work? How does it do it? It sounds like we're going to really need to have people in the future who know how things are working, because at some point, when it's making decisions and we're not sure how that works, we need to have those experts, I think.
I think that's absolutely true. And I would add one nuance to that, which is that it's not just people who use AI replacing jobs for people who don't use AI. It's people who use AI really thoughtfully and carefully and understand the nuances between different AI tools and understand how to get AI tools to achieve a particular kind of goal they have in mind. Because a lot of the AI tools are built so flexibly and so in such an open-ended kind of way that they can be used just terribly and ineffectively and inefficiently as easily as they can be used well.
Right.
And a lot of them are not necessarily self-explanatory in terms of how to use it at the highest level, because the people who have designed them don't even know yet what all of they can be used for in some cases. So I think one of the things that's really important that people maybe underestimate is the importance of like developing expertise at particular AI tools. Even though that's not the ultimate goal, right? The goal isn't to develop an expertise at that AI tool. It's a means to an end.
Right.
But some people assume that there isn't that level of skill, or that there isn't that, or that it's kind of like a one size fits all thing. You just use it and suddenly you're good to go. And actually, I think increasingly the actual usage of the tool, and you mentioned Sora earlier. Sora is an example of this, where Sora has a lot of complexity actually in terms of the different gradations of approaches you can take and the ways you can remix and blend and do all sorts of other things within Sora. So it's not just the idea of kind of using AI generated video. It's like mastering that particular skill set, if that's relevant to the work you're doing or the goals you're trying to achieve. So I am an advocate also for, really getting into the weeds in some cases in the tools that we're using. Again, not as an end in of itself, but in order that we can really execute our vision effectively. And sometimes you need to really like master the tool to be able to do that well.
For sure. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for sharing your insights on future of jobs, on education. I've learned a lot just today from, really digging into the weeds, because I think you're right. Like Sora is beyond me because I'm not a videographer, and and as much as it's really neat to create something, like to give it some instructions and to create it, that kind of thing is beyond me. But some of these tools that, you and I talked about today, I already have a better understanding. I already have a better context for it. So your work with these digital tools is really inspiring. So thank you for doing the work that you do. And thank you for giving us the time today.
Thanks for having the conversation and for some great questions. I'm really excited about what's ahead. I think 2025 is going to be a really exciting year.
Me too. I have a quick outro. To all our listeners, thank you for tuning in and being on this journey with us. If you want to learn more about Jeremy's work, be sure to check out his Wonder Tools newsletter. It's going to be in the show notes. We're going to have some links to some of the other things that we talked about. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and if you enjoyed the episode, let us know. And next time, we're going to continue exploring the future of education, the future of work, and how AI is reshaping the whole workforce. So you don't want to miss it. Thanks for listening to AI Goes to College today.